The, it's a pleasure to be moderating this particular session. Just to put it into perspective, that when I look at the rise of emerging markets or the restructuring of the global economy that is underway, so I look at it from multiple lenses, and at least 5 lenses that are relevant from the perspective of companies, global strategy, and it's interesting how at least four of the 5 perspectives are represented in the agenda for the whole day. So one is emerging economies as markets, emerging economies as platforms for global cost efficiency, emerging economies as platforms for innovation, emerging economies becoming now seriously as sources of low-cost capital, particularly China, and emerging economies as the springboard for the rise of new, aggressive, ambitious competitors. And in fact, if you just look at the design of this whole day, each of these sessions is really focused on one or sometimes 2 of these lenses. And of these different lenses, this particular session focuses on innovation. So looking at emerging economies and how they are transforming the global innovation agenda. It's my pleasure to have 2 very interesting, distinguished panelists with me. What I'll do is I'll introduce the panelists and then just provide a brief overview to the subject matter, and then turn over to the panelists, each of whom would then like to take about 15 to 20 minutes to make a presentation about the issues from their perspective. And this is almost like I see these as 2 in-depth case studies. And after that, we will open up to Q&A. I'll probably lead some of the discussion and then open up and invite questions from you in the audience. So immediately to my left is Dr. Manish Gupta. He is a director for the India Research Lab for IBM, which is one of the 10 global research labs. So, there is R&D, and this is the R part of R&D. He has very illustrious background, a bachelor's in technology from Indian Institute of Technology at Delhi, a PhD computer science from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, has been a lifelong IBM person, joined IBM in 1992. And in fact, I'm sure you all read about the IBM Blue Gene machine. He led the software development for the IBM Blue Gene machine. So he's a very illustrious and high-achieving researcher. He has 70 publications, 18 patents, over 3,000 citations, so obviously huge impact. He is an ACM distinguished scientist, also a member of the IBM Academy of Technology, and was earlier senior manager at the IBM Watson Research Lab, and then since about a year and a half back has been in India as chief technologist for IBM India, and also as the director for the India Research Lab. Then to the next of Dr. Manish Gupta is Mr. Paul van der Boer, who is from Holland. He is currently doing his an undergrad in aerospace engineering from Delft University, is currently doing a PhD at Carnegie Mellon in engineering and public policy. And what would be of particularly high interest to us is that his focus and what he is doing research on and what he will talk about in his presentation today is really looking at user innovation in emerging economies with a particular focus on mobile banking. And I think, if you've been following what's going on, for instance, in Africa with Safaricom, with Vodafone, M-Pesa, that's a hugely important development. So we have, almost like looking at IBM research in India, looking at mobile banking in emerging markets. These are 2 very rich case studies. So if I put this subject matter into a broader perspective, that when I look at what's happening in terms of the globalization or the transformation of the global innovation agenda, that emerging economies really influence this agenda in 2 ways. So one is, we could say, a supply side effect, and the other is a demand side effect. The supply side effect essentially is a very large number of scientists and engineers now are part of the global research pool. So in fact, the figures are from a recent report by UNESCO, that if you look at the world's researchers today, 40% of the researchers are based in Asia. The So that's the supply side effect, and that's the reason why, for instance, IBM has a very sizable research lab in India, why GE has a 5,000-person research lab in Bangalore, why Microsoft's second biggest research center is in Beijing. And so that's the talent pool effect. So that's one. And the second is the demand side effect of emerging economies, because emerging economies today, they are about 80% of the world's population, but about 28% of the world's GDP. So even 15 years from now, when emerging economies grow to be over half of the world's GDP at market exchange rates, still the population will be about 80% of the world's population, which means that emerging economies now are getting very bulky. But in terms of per capita incomes, in terms of buying power, still the buying power is very low. Just look at China, the biggest of all as an emerging economy, second largest economy in the world. But in terms of per capita income, China is not even in the top 100. 2025, when China almost certainly is the biggest economy, at that time, its population will be about 4.5 times that of the US. Translated per capita income of China, even 2025 as the biggest economy in the world, will still be about 22%, 23% that of the US, which is roughly what Mexico to the US is today. So essentially, the demand side effect of emerging economies is that, yes, there is a market for the super rich in places like Mumbai or Shanghai, but there is a huge, vast market of people whose per capita incomes are a tiny fraction of the per capita incomes in places like the US and Europe. And so that's a vast market for companies that can provide ultra-low-cost products and services. So that's really market-centric innovation. So really, there is the supply side in terms of talent, tapping into the talent, and then there is the demand side, which is driving, creating products and services for the billions of people whose buying power is extremely low. So with that as a background, and what we have here is looking at Manish and talking about IBM Research Lab in India. So that's really a case of a giant multinational starting out and tapping into the talent pool, but then increasingly finding itself that that's not the only opportunity that India offers, that there's a huge market side to it. So now IBM is getting sucked into playing both games, the supply side and the demand side. And Paul, your focus on mobile banking clearly is driven, obviously, by the market-centric nature of the innovation. So therefore, we get two very different, in-depth, almost like case studies on really the two central aspects or two central dimensions of how the rise of emerging economies is transforming the global innovation agenda. So with that, I will turn the floor over to Manish.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do is I'll talk about the services innovations that are going on in India and talk about it as both an opportunity finally for us to have societal impact with the kind of technology innovations that we all kind of like to think about, and true leadership also in a global sense. Can I go to the next chart? So, is there a, okay. If you look at what's going on in India, there's a lot of service delivery companies, well-known Indian companies like Infosys, TCS, Wipro, and so on, which are doing a lot of service delivery work for global clients all over the world out of India. And to compete effectively with these companies, companies like IBM, HP, and so on also started Accenture. We also started to do a lot of service delivery work out of various global delivery centers. And typically, for most of these companies, the largest of these delivery centers happen to be in India. So we do a lot of work, again, with these business units to help improve levels of productivity through higher levels of automation, quality, and value. And I'll give you some examples of what we are doing in that area. To me, a really interesting thing, which we have started looking at it more recently, is this now need and opportunity for us to apply these innovations to deal with problems of national interest. And these relate to, certainly for India, scalability of quality education and healthcare, it's a huge issue. I mean, you do have these elite institutions like IITs and so on, which are very well known for their quality of education. However, if you look at the broad masses, our educational system is really in very, very poor state. And there's the real issue of how to impart quality education to the masses, and likewise, quality healthcare. Infrastructure, earlier today, one of the panelists was talking about there's barely an infrastructure to speak of in India, right? When you think about roads and so on. So an opportunity to build, not only build out this infrastructure, but build it in a smarter manner. And also, there's this opportunity for us to try to apply information technology to ultimately increase the levels of transparency in how things get done. So I mentioned things like, which may not be familiar to too many of you, things like I've listed NREGA payments. This is something called National Rural Employment Guarantee Act that the government of India recently kind of came out with, which guarantees a certain minimum employment. So to the unemployed people in India, in rural parts of India, it guarantees 100 days of employment at a certain minimum wage. And again, the estimates are that, so there are again billions of dollars that get spent on that scheme. And estimates of how much actually makes it to the real intended recipients, they vary. The most precise estimate that I've heard is about 15%. 85% of this is kind of siphoned off by various officials, and perhaps of the order of 15% actually makes it to the people that it is intended for. So, so in fact, as you start to look at mobile technologies and as you start to do mobile payments and so on, can you start to do more of these transactions electronically and help plug some of these loopholes? Because today, a lot of that money is supposedly getting paid to these people who are working, but actually is entering some other bank accounts. The other aspect that I'll talk about now is some of the unique challenges. So as we look at, again, India both as a market and also as a place for doing service delivery, there are some unique challenges that we face, which means you cannot simply take some, and what excites us as researchers, you cannot just take some research that's been developed, that's been done, let's say, in the US or for Europe, and apply it blindly to India. You have to come up with new innovations to deal with some of these unique challenges. And some of these challenges come in the form of scale. Let me give just a quick, share with you a quick case study of a company called Bharti Airtel. How many of you have heard of this company, Airtel, Bharti Airtel? Some of you. So let's go back to the year 2004. I was still in the US. The stereotype about India in those days was Indian IT companies do outsourcing work for Western companies, right? So often there's a lot of controversy about why are we outsourcing all of this work to these Indian companies. So here was this relatively less known company called Bharti Airtel, which was this small-time Indian company offering mobile phone services and so on, which decided to outsource all of their operations to a bunch of Western companies. So they outsourced all of their networking operations to a bunch of companies headed by Ericsson, and they decided to outsource all of their IT infrastructure to a company called IBM. And they decided to just focus on acquiring customers, growing customers, and they have absolutely zero technology. Everything is outsourced to these bunch of Western companies. And in 2004, what IBM signed with Bharti Airtel was this landmark agreement. It was a 7-year agreement where by the end of 2011, we were supposed to help take Bharti from about 5 million subscribers to about 45 million subscribers. And I remember I was in the US and I said, wow, amazing growth. Factor of 9 jump in the number of subscribers in just 7 years. Amazing. And guess what? Their growth has been. I mean, we are still not through with the end of 2011. Bharti already has over 150 million subscribers in India. So the growth of Bharti has always been ahead of the projections. So when we apply, when we provide IT infrastructure to a company like Bharti, we are dealing with scale that IBM hasn't seen anywhere else in the world. I mean, forget about IBM. No IT company has seen that scale anywhere else in the world. There are Chinese companies which are bigger, but again, they don't use the same kind of model of outsourcing. So when we are dealing, and I'll give you an example of kind of how it forces us to innovate. So not only is the scale very high, even the price point is very different. Because Bharti Airtel has to offer, I mean, for it to compete effectively with the other telecom providers in India, they are providing telephone services, mobile phone services at less than 0.01, I mean, at less than 1 cent per minute. I mean, that's the kind of usual rate. And then came along a company called Tata Docomo, which introduced this per second billing. So now many of these rates have now fallen to less than 0.01 cent per second. Now, imagine you are an IT company. So the other thing which was interesting about the IBM Bharti deal was that IBM, it was a value price deal. IBM was getting paid based on a percentage of the revenue that Bharti makes, not based on how many servers or storage systems and so on we sell, we deploy on that account. So naturally, and Bharti spends a relatively smaller percentage of their revenues on IT than most other telecom companies in the West. That is part of, again, how they keep their costs low. Now, imagine you are a company like IBM, right, which has to provide this IT infrastructure. When somebody makes that 2-second call, our technology infrastructure needs to log that particular call, create that call detail record, generate billing, and so on. And we will get a fraction of that 0.02 cent, a very small fraction of that 0.02 cents that Bharti is going to make on that particular transaction, on that particular call. So which means that the IT infrastructure that we have to provide to Bharti has to be super, super duper efficient. So the kind of pressures that we face from IBM in India in developing this kind of an infrastructure is unprecedented. And this becomes an opportunity for us to then show true leadership to the rest of the world, because now we are developing solutions for Bharti which are now being taken first to the other telecom providers within India and then to other telecom providers elsewhere in the world. What did this unique scale and cost point force us to do? One of the things it forced us to do, in a traditional telecom company, you have all of these, when you're looking at the IT infrastructure, again, I don't want to kind of scare you with all the technical details. I'll just explain at a very high level what's going on. For an IT company, I mean, a lot of what you do for a telecom company revolves around this thing called call detail record. Anytime you make a call detail record gets generated. Anytime you send a text message, a call detail record gets generated, and so on. And then all of the billing, business intelligence, revenue assurance, everything is essentially doing some processing over that call detail record. So traditionally, what gets done, and this is how we also get started with Bharti, is you have various applications. You have a billing applications, you have a revenue assurance application, you have a fraud management application, and so on. And each of these applications run with their own copy of the database, this call detail record database. What we did at Bharti was we used, so this was again an innovation that came out of our US labs, Watson lab, Infosphere Streams, which looks at ability to do management of the streaming data. Increasingly, more and more, you're finding in this world of sensors that a lot of data is being generated in real time, and it is kind of streaming in, and you have to do some processing over that data before you store anything. And perhaps you're going to discard much of that data, but you want to do some processing. So the IBM team at Watson developed this piece of software called Infosphere Streams, and the very first time it was actually applied in a telecom environment was for Bharti, where the IBM India team and the Watson team together worked on this system, CDR hub, where we applied this streaming technology to now create a single copy of this call detail repository, which can then different views of that data can be used by these different applications, that billing application and so on, with the result that now you have a much not only cheaper infrastructure, you just need to maintain one copy of that kind of database, but you also have a much higher performing system, much more robust system, and you can now do the kind of processing. Now at Bharti, we can kind of process data that is only a few hours old, not something like, I mean, the traditional approach is to take data, put it into a data warehouse, and then do business intelligence, and then say, okay, over that 2 days old data, let me apply these analytics and figure out what kind of promotional messages to send to people. At Bharti, you can now do it for 2 hours old data, the most recent data. So not only is it lower cost, it is technologically much more advanced than any system that's been deployed for any other telecom company anywhere in the world. So example of, again, leadership innovations being done by India, done in India. I shouldn't say just by India, done in India because the need for that innovation is first arising in India. Next one, it's not just India. Bharti, after having honed this particular model, decided to buy this company called Zain with operations in Africa. And by the way, the first thing that they did when they started their operations for Zain in Africa, in 16 countries, Zain has operations in 16 countries, the first thing they did was they dropped the calling rates in Africa by about 70%. And very soon after that, they dropped the calling rates by another 20%. So the calling rates in Africa were actually much higher than the calling rates in India. And now Bharti is providing those same economics, trying to leverage the same kind of business model that they have perfected in India to now the continent of Africa. And make no mistake, I mean, okay, I can't speak for Bharti, but I'm sure Africa is not the last continent that they are kind of entering. So as we look at their supporting, and then IBM signed again a large deal with Bharti to support their the IT infrastructure for their operations in Africa. Now we did the math. So what happened on this deal was the big guys, our CEO and Bharti CEO, I mean, these guys got together and signed a piece of paper, and then they said, oh, you guys, now you work it out, how you're going to actually do the, make it work. And as the guys tried to figure out how to make it work, they realized it's not going to work if we start to have data centers in each of those 16 countries. You'll have to do it in a very, very smart manner. So you have to ultimately support these operations out of a few hubs. See, based on regulation, whatever can be brought to India, you bring that to India. And then you have perhaps a couple of hubs. And right now the plan is to have one hub in Kenya, one hub in Nigeria, and do as much of the IT kind of stuff in these two hubs, because that's the only way the economics is going to work. And the technological challenges that it imposes are huge, because I mean, I work in this area. I mean, people talk about cloud computing is the biggest buzzword, right? And when I go to all of these conferences where people talk about cloud computing, I mean, I struggle to kind of keep myself awake, because it's almost the same set of charts. Oh, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and all that. If you want to talk about real cloud, look at this. This is kind of cloud on steroids, the kind of problem that we are dealing with. You have to support these operations, this kind of giant cloud out of a few distributed data centers. And oh, by the way, there's limited network connectivity between these kind of countries. Sometimes the network bandwidth is very low. There are all kinds of regulatory concerns to deal with, and so on. So there's a lot of first of a kind technical work that we are doing. How to do network virtualization, how to make this distributed center look like a virtual single data center, like a single cloud, and support all of these operations out of those hubs. It's a huge new challenge that we are taking on, being done first for Bharti. Okay, let me give a few examples which are kind of global problems, but which become particularly challenging in the context of a country like India. So one of the things that companies care a lot about is their customers. And often different companies, they may have different touch points, different lines of business that are dealing with the same set of or overlapping set of customers. And certainly the government often is providing multiple services to citizens. So the governments are often interested in a single view of the citizen. And companies are interested in a single view of their customer. So again, just to illustrate it in the context of a telecom company problem, again, this problem was posed to us by one of the telecom company CIOs in India. He said, we offer these services, mobile phone services, landline services, cable TV services, and broadband services to customers. And each of the lines of business kind of grew on its own independently, and they have their own database. So this guy was talking about a particular, and they have this notion of platinum customers, right, who are really valuable customers. So for the mobile phone service line, there was this platinum customer who would have monthly bills of like over $1,000. And it's very hard to generate a monthly bill of over $1,000, right, with the kind of calling rates that I was talking about. By the way, I mean, I like to tease some of the people in the US, right, about what I pay for my iPhone. I had to pay, by the way, yeah, so on the downside, I had to pay the full price of this. It wasn't subsidized for me. But once I bought iPhone at its full market price, guess what's the monthly rate that I pay for the mobile phone services as well as the data services? So there's Google Map, all of that stuff. There's Gmail that I do, Google Maps, and so on. It's about $7, somewhere between $6 to $7 a month is what I pay for my mobile phone and data services in India. And Indian companies have figured out how to make money off of these kind of rates, while a lot of the US companies, they struggle to make money when they're fleecing all of you. So this guy, so there was this guy who used to have still monthly bills of over $1,000 per month. So he was obviously a very, very important customer. But for their broadband connection, I mean, how many different broadband plans are you going to offer? He was an ordinary customer. So he missed making a monthly payment for the broadband connection, and it was promptly terminated. And this guy was hopping mad. I mean, and also if you know about India, I mean, Indians, we like to think of ourselves as this, there's this concept of VIPs, very important person and so on. So this guy was hopping mad. I mean, you're treating a VIP like me, like that? I missed one payment and you terminated my connection? This company didn't have a single view of that customer, so which is what they're trying to get now. Now, how would you do it? I mean, it's very simple, right? You take all of your different databases, and if the name matches and the address matches, you conclude it's the same customer, right? Very simple. Wrong. It's not that simple in India. So that's an example that I've listed here. So a guy called Pramod Bhardwaj, especially if you start with the last name written in Hindi originally, that last name could be spelled in at least 3 or 4 different ways in English. And coupled with that, if you start making spelling mistakes in your database, you could have like 10 different variants of that name. Now, worse than name is the address, is the way we write addresses. So while the problem exists to a very limited degree in the US, right? You could have the same address. You could, the same road could be known as Route 9 in one kind of area, and let's say by the Crompond Road or whatever in another part. So sometimes the same address could be written in 2 different ways in the US too. And there are tools to help you deal with all of this cleansing. In India, no such address standardization exists. So, and this is a real example. This particular address could be written at least in these 3 different ways. Number 85 Jayanagar 7th block, or 7th block Jayanagar 85, or 85, Jayanagar 7, Bangalore. This is in a major city. Our own research lab, our address in Delhi can be written in at least 4 different ways. So just inferring that it's the same address. So IBM, by the way, I mean, a lot of companies, they have software that helps you with all of this master data management. So IBM has this software called Infosphere Qualitystage that helps you do this. And this software also has geography-specific rules. So for instance, for India, you could add a rule which says the word street is interchangeable with the word road or mark. So you have that rule. Now, we started with that software with India-specific rules, and we looked at the real data on for Indian clients. We found that the accuracy level was close to about 20%. That's it. Only in 20% of the cases were we able to infer that it's the same address when it was actually the same address. So our team then worked on a number of novel techniques. So first they developed techniques to filter this noise, all of these spelling mistakes, those kind of things. Then organize these rules in a better manner. Because the first thing you say is, OK, if the accuracy is bad, let me add rules. But how do I know how the new set of rules interact with the old set of rules? So we came up with a framework called Ripple Down Rules Framework, which organizes these rules in a more proper hierarchical manner. We came up with techniques to automatically detect rules. Instead of a human programming all of these rules, can you look at the data, start with the data, and automatically discover these rules intelligently? So there were all of these novel techniques that our team developed because of the challenge, the unique challenge that we saw in India. And these weren't India-specific techniques. All of these techniques are very generic. They just were applied to the unique challenge of India. And now these are being used in our next generation of products for all geographies. And the accuracy of these techniques on Indian address data then went up to about over 75%. And we were celebrating, I mean, about all of this wonderful success until we saw this data from one of the largest banks in India, which has a lot of rural customers. And suddenly, our accuracy rates were, again, below 50%. Because in India, rural India, the concept of a street address often doesn't exist. Your address may be behind that temple or under that banyan tree. And now you go infer that, OK, what's the canonical address that you're going to use? So our team is now working on that challenge. We don't have a breakthrough yet on that one. But the fact about using data to guide rules, this is something that we leveraged in the Indian context because one thing which we had a lot of in India was data. So now our team has access to data on 60 million households. We have address data for 60 million households. And compared to any other group, research group, academic research group, or industrial research group, which is working on this particular problem, we have at least an order of magnitude more data than anybody else. So it's become a source of strength for us, that scale. So another example, I gave away kind of the punchline of this, unfortunately. So let me back up a little bit. So intelligent transportation systems. So we have been talking about building this smarter planet. And IBM has deployed various smarter transportation solutions in cities like Stockholm, London, and so on. And typically what we do is we will, in these cities, the solution that we deployed was have a video camera. By the way, if I'm running out of time, just let me know how much time I have. 5 minutes. So we had this solution where we would have a video camera monitoring every lane of traffic. And with that video camera, you capture the license plate information for the car. And then you do optical character recognition on that license plate. You figure out who's the owner of the vehicle. And then you charge them a certain toll. And it's all usage-based charging. So if you enter the certain part of downtown during peak hours, you pay a higher toll than otherwise, and so on. And through that, you change the behavior of humans. And you encourage them to not drive into the downtown during peak hours or take public transportation and so on. And so that solution has worked fairly well in cities like Stockholm, London, and so on. Now, when you start now, traffic, I would tell you, is a much bigger problem in Indian cities than London. I mean, I have been stuck in traffic in London too, but trust me, I mean, London is nothing compared to Bangalore or Delhi, for that matter, when traffic gets bad. So we obviously need smarter transportation solutions in India. Now, the first step to building a smarter transportation solution is you have to estimate the traffic density. So the obvious approach that many people have taken, many companies have taken, in fact, I've seen tenders being floated by the Delhi government where they talk about now video cameras being deployed all over. Now, if you start to deploy a similar solution to what we deployed in London and Stockholm, where there's a video camera for every lane of traffic, is that going to work in India? And this is where I was saying, I've given away the punchline, of course not. This is kind of, again, photograph of a typical day in the city of Delhi in the morning. And by the way, there are lanes. This is probably a 3-lane kind of road. So the lanes in India, they serve a decorative purpose. I mean, they decorate the roadway. There's no other purpose beyond that of lanes. So if you started to have one video camera per lane, yes, you'll capture maybe half of a license plate of this car. You'll capture this maybe kind of some cow that is crossing the road and so on. It's not going to be very effective. So the obvious solution, right, that then people from our India lab and China lab, so China also has a similar issue. So our people collaboratively started working. So China actually took the lead on developing this piece of software called Never Blocked, where they said, let's take advantage of the fact that almost everybody would be carrying a mobile phone on the road. So can you estimate the density of traffic from mobile phone data? And again, there's no simple answer. I mean, mobile phone data, in the ideal world, all mobile phones would have a GPS device. So you could kind of track accurately the location. But again, in India, most of those mobile phones today would be relatively cheaper phones. So you have to now rely on some cell phone triangulation and so on. And you only know approximate location, not the precise location. So one of our researchers, he said, can I, instead of all these video cameras and mobile, why not use audio sensors that could be placed on the road, at the side of the road? And to test out that hypothesis, he decided to use the mobile phone, but as an audio sensor. So the microphone, so what he did was, he went around with his mobile phone on the roads of Delhi, and he started recording the sound input that he was getting from that road. And he said, can I do signal processing over that sound input and characterize the traffic in one of these 3 states? Stuck traffic, which he defines as less than 5 kilometers per hour average speed, medium flowing traffic between 5 and 40 kilometers per hour, or free flowing traffic above 40. And with over 85% accuracy, he was able to just characterize that traffic. And it's not surprising when you think about it, because the kind of sound that you hear when the traffic is stuck in India, you have all kinds of honks, blaring, and so on, is very different from the kind of sound you get when cars are zipping by. So not surprisingly, he was able to apply this technique fairly effectively. So this is an example of, again, kind of a local innovation, right, where you're rethinking kind of how to address the particular challenge. One example, another example of a local innovation, which was where we completely rethought how you would develop a solution because of the unique needs of India. In India, let me just talk about the environment. Despite all of these economic advances and so on, there's only about 7 to 8% of the population in India which has access to a PC or an internet connection. Only about 7 to 8%. About 85 million was the last count of number of internet users. Whereas now everybody and their dog now have a mobile phone. There are over 750 million mobile phone numbers in India. We've been adding mobile phone numbers at the rate of about 15 million a month. So I was in Australia some time back. I was telling them we add the equivalent of an Australia every month in terms of number of mobile phone numbers in India. So of course, there are people who have multiple SIM cards and so on. So the exact number of mobile phone subscribers is not known. It's probably somewhere between 450 to 500 million. Now, what are these people doing with their mobile phones? They are essentially not doing Google searches over their phone. And even if they had smartphones, many of them would not be comfortable sending even text messages and so on their mobile phones. They're much more comfortable talking on their phone. So based on that, our team thought about how do we bring the benefits, at least if not all of the benefits, at least some of the benefits of the World Wide Web to the masses in India who do not have the notion of what the World Wide Web is, but they all have mobile phones and they can all talk. So we came up with this concept of spoken web, where analogous to websites, you have voice sites, and you can say, hey, what's new here? And you're right. Voice sites are nothing but interactive voice response kind of systems that you all probably hate. But we made it very easy for the masses to create their own voice sites. But more fundamentally, we had this concept of hyperlinks from one voice site to another. And our team invented the hyper-speech transfer protocol, analogous to HTTP, underlying the web, which governs how you go from one voice site to another. Not only will your telephone call get transferred, the context of what you were doing will get transferred as well. So in a longer version of this talk, I talk about how we can enable transactions, even mobile banking, on the spoken web, and start to give you some of the benefits of the World Wide Web. By the way, there are a lot of challenges because audio, unlike visual thing, is very sequential in nature. So there are huge challenges in how to make spoken web more usable, which we are working on. But this was a system. And in fact, when we developed the system, when we started running pilots in the villages in India, the masses taught the PhDs in our lab a lesson, because we went in with this very IBM-centric, enterprise-centric viewpoint. So IBMers kind of almost, once you are in IBM, with IBM, it's like you are just incapable of thinking about what consumers want. You only thing you can think about is what will an enterprise want to do. So we went in with this thinking, saying, OK, we'll offer a way for the plumber or the carpenter to offer their services to the people in the villages and so on. And when we actually ran these pilots, the villagers came up with things like putting matrimonial ad on the system, election speech, and somebody posted the voice of their 1-year-old son and started giving pointers of that voice site to friends and family that you want to listen to my son's voice, call up this number. So this family in that village had invented the voice version of Facebook and Twitter. And in fact, this year when we are trying to, in fact, later we heard about Google buying this Bay Area startup company called Say Now, which essentially does the same thing. This family had come up with that concept. And this year, when we are trying to take spoken web commercially to telecom companies, the scenarios that the telecom companies get most excited about are precisely the scenarios that the villagers taught us. They say, let's start to do social networking. Let's offer a social networking service based on voice to people. Let's offer matrimonial services based on voice. In fact, one of the applications that we are working on right now with the Karnataka state government is an employability platform. Can we connect job seekers with job providers for blue-collar jobs? None of them use the internet today. And so we are trying to provide a voice-based platform for basically a person, carpenter, plumber, and so on, to create their voice-based resume using spoken web, and then match them to potential employers. And our ultimate vision is to, is to connect all of these different stakeholders, including training agencies. Because one of the professors talked about this huge demographic dividend that India is going to enjoy, where by 2020, our average age of an Indian is expected to be about 29, as opposed to, I think, 39 for US and China, 45 for Western Europe, 48 for Japan. So our huge population in the working age is potentially going to be an asset if it is well-trained. If it is well-trained, it becomes an asset to the rest of the world. If it is not well-trained, it's a huge liability for the country. So there's a lot of focus on that. So I think let me wrap up. So I'll skip some of the other examples. So I'll just give one example of services innovation. So IBM, like other companies, does a lot of service delivery out of India. And one of the so those service delivery include IT services, where the data center could be, let's say, in New York, and you have people in Bangalore who are managing any kind of problems that arise in the servers and storage systems in that data center, or application services, or the most mundane of them all, call center services, right? Which, in fact, was sometimes the first face of India to many people in this part of the world. So you have contact centers. I mean, the people who work in those contact centers, I mean, that's pretty much the most mundane job you can find, right? But the technological problems that arise when you're trying to provide higher value in contact center services, they are fascinating. So again, I have a bunch of different interesting technologies. Just one technology I'll highlight, which we worked on, was called VOCA, Voice of Customer Analytics. Here, voice is used in a figurative sense. So this was actually piloted with a US car company. And whenever the customers of that US car company were sending them emails with some service requests or calling their agents, calling that car company, it was IBM agents sitting in India who were taking those calls. Now, what we said was, let's analyze all of those customer interactions between the customers of that company and the agents. And we convert all of that into text, and what we developed was this text analytics tool, which is doing things like sentiment mining. Is this customer happy or angry? If the customer is angry, what issues is this customer complaining about? Are there common issues? So we were able to share then high-level insights back with this car company about, here are some of your common problems that many of your customers are complaining about. And by the way, here are some of your customers who are highly dissatisfied with you, with your service. And this car company was able to then constitute a small team which addressed some of these common issues, which then reached out to some of these highly dissatisfied customers and addressed their problem before they went and bought a car from a competitor. So through this software and this service that now IBM is offering to our client, this car company, we have provided higher value to the client than just simply call center services. So this is an example of how we at IBM Research in India are applying technology innovations to deliver higher value as part of the services that we are delivering globally. And again, I'll skip some of these other things. There are other things being done on things like workforce management. So we do things like text analytics to automatically screen resumes. So IBM India receives over 60,000 resumes a month. So at that scale, you can't have an HR team looking at every resume. So we have software that automatically says, OK, this resume can be automatically rejected. Or given a job role, it suggests, OK, here are the 10 resumes that you should look at, because they meet we extract out the characteristics, like do you have enough Java experience, database experience, and so on. We are able to infer those things. So I think I'm going to stop here. That there is, hopefully I've given you a sense that both in areas like service delivery, which are being done in countries like India, there's a lot of opportunity for applying technology for innovations, as well as you start looking at these economies as markets in their own right, there are a lot of novel challenges that come up. And these challenges translate into some fascinating technological problems for us researchers, which people at our lab work on and have been having a great time addressing some of these challenges. So thank you all.
Paul.
So thank you, Manish. I just wanted to highlight some of my experience in Indian traffic. When I was living in Delhi, the company gave me a car and a driver, and after about 3 months, I got so tired of having to depend on the driver, I thought, well, let me get a motorbike and get a little bit more independent. So I'd never driven a motorbike, but I thought, I can learn here. They drive pretty slow and, dodge the cows or whatever. So I got out one day after I bought my motorbike, and, I was so focused on handling the gears and, just having to figure out how this motorbike worked that after about half an hour, I found myself somewhere and I thought, wow, maybe I should go home, it's pretty hot, and let me look for some signs. So I looked around and I was about in that picture where, where Manish was describing, and there was no signs, obviously. So, I started wondering, I started asking people, I live in this place, and they said me, they looked at me kind of puzzled. And so that was my hard lesson in sort of figuring out there's really no directions, there's no addresses, and it took me about 4 hours to get home, which initially was about 30 minutes just to get there. So yes, I understand the difficulties you have, and I learned not to go out without my driver on my motorbike after that. So anyhow, so I'm glad to hear that already the topic of mobile phones has been introduced, and actually Manish already mentioned some ways in which users are innovating, so maybe some of my talk is going to be familiar to you. So yeah, my name is Paul van der Boer. I'm a PhD student, and I initially, I was working for Voice Siemens in Delhi, and I asked myself the question, where does technology really come from? Because I was working at their R&D facility. We were working on pretty state-of-the-art technology. I was trained as an aerospace engineer, and I was wondering, I'm sitting here in Delhi, I'm developing or helping develop pretty high-tech stuff, which is probably going to be manufactured in China or somewhere in the south of India where they're building a plant, and then be installed in Sao Paulo. So for me, it was sort of a mystery. So where does really this technology that I'm helping build come from? And so that's how I started my PhD and asked some of the questions that I'll be explaining to you today. One of the interesting frameworks or literature streams that I got in touch with early on was user innovation. And user innovation, where's the slide machine?
Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So, traditionally, you have manufacturers that produce stuff and users that use stuff. So it's a dichotomy, right? So you have producers that produce, users that use. And this new concept of user innovation was coined by a person named Eric von Hippel, who's at MIT and who's been supervising me on this work. And what he said was, well, if you look at the market, which is that bottom curve, over time, as technology diffuses, there's a larger segment of the market that's using that technology. So it's more interesting for firms to enter when a lot of the users or consumers are interested in having the need that technology satisfies. But at the beginning of the curve, there's a small fraction of users which are not really happy with what the market has to offer, and they apparently tweak the products, change the products, and come up with some innovations, as we've seen from Manish. So if you think about what is really user innovation, the way it's defined, and I'm just going to give you a quick definition for the rest, which will be useful for the rest of the presentation. User innovators are those individuals that innovate for the use of a product or service, whereas firms traditionally innovate for the purpose of selling, so for profit reasons. So just a quick example. This was the 4T transformed by a user into a snowmobile. So there's some creativity there. Same 4T, which can also be used as a tractor. And then we have a 4T, which was built into or converted into a chapel. Now, I'm not going to speculate about the diffusion potential of this innovation, but nonetheless, it's pretty creative. And if you look at some of the extreme sports, it turns out that many of the users there are trying to sort of find their limits. And because they're trying to find and explore those limits, often the products available on the market don't really meet the demands that they have. Well, I don't know about the right ones. I don't have any children, but apparently it's a pretty successful innovation. The bottom right one, the top right one has not been commercialized yet, I think. But anyhow, so I do know about kitesurfing. When I lived in sunnier lands and in Pittsburgh, where I live now, I had this equipment, and it's a pretty fun sport to learn. And it turns out that originally it was users who developed this entire sport, because there's these guys who normally did wave surfing. And they were sitting on a beach, and they on windy days, they would with those big kites. They're like, I think they're called mattress kites. They would just stand on the beach and play around. And then one day, one guy said, well, how about I combine them? So it turns out that all these, to do that, you need special gear, you need handlebars, you need special fins so you don't drift. So all of that stuff, and the producers today on the market were originally users of that equipment. So another one you guys might know, this is a Camelback. So there's this guy, a paramedic in Texas, I believe, who was he liked mountain biking. So he was very thirsty while he mountain biked, and he thought, well, during the day I use these IV bags, I think they're called, these plastic bags. Let me put one in my backpack and then connect it to my mouth, so it's an easy way to carry water. And this obviously became a pretty successful product that even the US military, I think, uses today. So I've talked mostly about products, and it's very tangible to see, well, what happens in products. As you see the pictures, users can change stuff, can tweak stuff, can build their own things. But what about services? I mean, I think services are about 75% of the GDP in most developed countries. So it's a pretty important sector to look at. And so there's two researchers, Oliveira and von Hippel, who looked at banking services initially in the US, so retail banking services. It turns out that about 55% of those computerized versions of corporate banking services were actually first developed by the users. What does that mean? That means that users were out there with a little program that they had developed for themselves, providing them the service for themselves. So they basically out-innovated, or at least pre-innovated, the producers. So what is user innovation really, what does it really consist of? When does it happen? I mean, some of you are practitioners, maybe in the business world, so you want to know, well, okay, that's all very nice. We see that it happens accidentally. What can we really do to leverage this sort of potential? So there's two ingredients mainly that I think people agree on that are that contribute to user innovation. So you have sticky information and you have need. What is sticky information? Very basically, it's that paramedic who knew about those IV bags. He knew about the need that he had in the field or when he was mountain biking, and he put one on one together and actually created that Camelback. So it's information that a producer might not have access to because they don't know what you can do with IV bags, or they might have never thought to put those in backpacks and create a new product. And need is really the second thing, which brings us to the question, I think, of this, at least of the panel and maybe a little bit of the conference, is where is there really a high need? And the answer, I think, the one I tried to explore was, I think there's a high need in emerging countries. Now, I've understood that there's sort of it's not really clear what emerging countries and a developing country, so you might as well put here developing countries. It's basically those people who have higher need, who have less access to less products and less services, and therefore have a higher need in whatever field. And it's a little bit abstract. I'll get to exactly how I define the need in my case. But in any case, we agreed in the beginning that in emerging countries or developing countries, there's a higher need for more diverse products and services. So what does it really mean? So I think it's not unknown that there are some grassroots innovations. People have written about this. People have looked at that. But can you really expect innovations that happen there? So let's say someone transforms their bike in some sort of a wheelbarrow system or to carry some hay. That's maybe an innovation in Ethiopia or another place where they don't have access to more expensive equipment. But if you bring that same innovation to the US, people would say, well, that's fine. I have my big tractor over here. So besides just looking at innovations and seeing if people are actually creative and generating innovations in these emerging or developing countries, you also want to know what's the relevance on an absolute global level of these innovations. Are they, would they be interesting to bring them to the US? And well, one of the, I mean, this is just a quick example. So you guys might have seen this, but so I worked for some time in Sierra Leone, and there, if you want to charge your phone, you can't really do it because, first of all, there's no plug, and if there were a plug, there's no electricity. So, you need, how do people there? We've talked about, we know that people are, getting access to phones increasingly. So, if you're a rural village in India or in Sierra Leone, anywhere else, how do you charge that phone? Right? It becomes an additional problem. And so one guy thought, well, I'm going to use a car battery and charge my phone with that. So he realized that that was actually a useful thing for not only him, but for the rest of the village. And he made that a sort of a commercial service he sold. Now, this is something I think you guys might have seen in Starbucks or other places on the corner, that as you walk in and have your coffee, you can actually put in your phone to charge. So we know that there are cases of some innovations that went from these developing countries and then came to more developed countries. So now we come to mobile banking. So what is mobile banking? I don't know how many of you, maybe you can raise some hands, who has used mobile banking? All right, so yeah, I would say it's about 10 hands, maybe 5. So why is it so interesting? I mean, I'm talking about big innovations or something. Just look at the numbers for a second. These are economist numbers. So, and we heard earlier we cannot discuss with economist numbers or definitions. So in this case, I think we're safe. We have about 4 billion people who have mobile phone accounts, and of those, about 75% are in developing countries, and all of the growth pretty much has been in those developing countries. And when we talk about mobile banking, it's basically any financial service that is offered through the mobile phone. That's the way I looked at these services. So you told me that about 5 of you, maybe 10 of you have used mobile banking. So 89% of successful mobile banking deployments have happened in emerging countries. You see that Google Earth image is from the GSMA, the GSM Association, and they have basically a deployment tracker. And a deployment is very simply, it's, for example, Bharti, who says, well, I'm going to offer mobile payments in India. That's one deployment in one country. Or it could be M-Pesa, who offers mobile money transfer in Kenya, another deployment. So the numbers say that about, I think, 97 out of 109, so 89% of deployments actually happen in emerging countries. And then we see another interesting number is that, okay, we see 80% of the people have access to a mobile phone signal, but only 20% of those people have access to financial services. So there's a big gap in what the market really offers to the consumers there. So I went out and looked at all these services, all these service innovations that happen. I mean, mobile banking has been available since approximately 1999, 2000. So it's pretty recent, so it's pretty easy to find the history of these services. There's about 23 of them. And I decided to look at the history of those services. Was it first a user who did that, or was it first a producer? And a couple of examples. For example, domestic money transfer. What that is basically people can send remittances with their mobile phone from one mobile phone to the other one. And this was really pioneered in the Philippines. So you can imagine, one of those scratch cards. I don't know if you even know what that is, but in a lot of these developing countries, they do prepaid phone cards. And what that means, you buy a scratch card at the supermarket, you scratch off the plastic or whatever, you get a 16-digit unique activation code, you call the number, and they put the $10 or whatever on your account. Well, people were actually using that functionality to send money over. They were sending the 16-digit code to family members on the other side of the Philippines, because the Philippines has about 7,100 islands, so it's very difficult to get money across or across the country, and they were using that functionality to send money around. And then the same was happening with payments. They were using that airtime to pay for the services and products that they bought. Before the producers had actually introduced these capabilities. The same is the case with, for example, salary disbursement. people were getting paid in Gcash, which was an innovation done by Globe Telecom in the Philippines. And Gcash was a follow-up from the earlier example where people were using airtime to send money around. Well, they said, we need to introduce Gcash. Now, Gcash was initially just a remittance service. But then one guy said, well, actually, it's much easier for me to pay my employees in Gcash. So he started paying 1 employee in Gcash, and then 250 employees. And Globe headquarters in Manila said, hey, what's going on? We have an instant increase of our Gcash volume, and we don't know where it's coming from. So they went to this guy, and they realized that he's paying his employees. And so they launched the service. Initially, this was one person who was doing this by SMS, 250 SMSs of Gcash from one mobile phone to the other. They actually innovated and launched the service called Text de Sueldo, which in Filipino means text your salary. And the same with mobile savings account. I mean, this is a statement by Greg Reeve. He's the head of innovations of Vodafone, who sort of helped Safaricom launch M-Pesa. He said that he knew, he saw in the data that already 23% of the people were using mobile money in their mobile wallet as a savings account before they ever launched M-Pesa, which is about a year ago. So users were doing things with the functionalities that they had available before the producer gave it a name, launched the service, or actually programmed their system to actually have that service available to all their customers. So now we come back to the need. If you zoom in, let's see. Well, actually, let me go back one. So this is a very simple curve. You look at two axes. I try to quantify in some way what is the need of a financial service in any of the countries that I was analyzing. And you can say, well, there's a number of ATMs per capita or per 100,000 people, and there's a number of bank branches. So that sort of gives me an idea of what is the accessibility or the penetration of financial services in these countries. And if you look at this map, countries that are going to be close to the origin have weak access to financial services for their people, and countries that are further away are going to have better access. So further away means lower need than people or countries which are closer to the origin, which means a higher need. So if you zoom in, I cannot read it from here, so you probably can't read it either from there. But the U.S. is on the outside. They don't have mobile banking. A lot of the countries which you will recognize as developed countries are further away from the origin. And so I started looking at, besides the idea that we know that some innovations are happening by users in these developing countries, which countries did it really happen in? And was it countries that had lower access to financial services? So I ranked the countries. So you can rank them and say, well, the one on the top of the list has the highest number of financial access, and the country on the lowest part of the list has no financial access. So top is Finland. You can imagine they have a high level of financial access, and at the bottom you have Congo, which is number, 102 out of 111 countries. Now, you see that those three columns, which are below origin of innovation, I coded it saying user, producer, or joint. Sometimes the user and the producer did it together. And you can see as you go down the list where there's a higher need in the market, users were actually responsible for a larger percentage of the innovations. So now, you all have that book that you got, I think, when you registered, at least the first 100 people. I think it's called Billions of Entrepreneurs. I would suggest, in this case, how about billions of innovators or innovators? You can imagine that when users start innovating, you were saying it, Manish, you have people in the villages teaching PhDs. The masters were teaching the PhDs. All of a sudden, you might have, I don't know how many researchers IBM has, and Manish didn't want to tell me, but there's a lot of them in India. Let's say it's 2,000. Let's say it's 5,000. How many people live in India and are using mobile phones? That was about 500 million, right? So if those people, if you can enable them somehow to have a more open platform, perhaps, to enable them to innovate with the tools that they have, because they apparently have a high need and they can do it already with pretty closed systems. I mean, look at your mobile phone. I mean, what can you really do with this? All right, you can't really innovate. It's not really easy to access unless you have maybe a special degree or a special interest. It's not easy immediately to do something with it. So some thoughts. Okay, this is the last slide. So good. Can you actually create or give users and consumers tools for innovation? you know Apple's created this developer platform where many of the users, you can develop apps. And so you go onto the website of Apple, they give you a whole software package, and you can start programming and develop your own apps. That's a good example of how you can enable consumers to develop innovations. I don't know what the exact number of apps is, but I think about 6 months ago, we were close to 100,000 apps. Probably it's about double now, if not. It's around that number. So many people are investing the effort to create new applications for the market. Can we, in some way, and this is again relevant to you because you're the ones doing, practicing out there, is there a way that we can bring platforms to these users which makes it easier for them to innovate? I founded an NGO. It's called Yele, Project Yele in Sierra Leone, where initially when I was doing aerospace, we wanted to bring some technologies to a place where it wasn't necessarily, they didn't have it, so we helped refurbish a hydropower plant. And then we thought, okay, we give them this electricity, what can we really do with it? Or what can they do with it? And so now we're building an open platform for them, which converts the electricity in some useful tools like refrigeration, internet, light, clean drinking water, so that local entrepreneurs can have the ability to play with that and hopefully come up with their own innovations. They might not be breakthrough innovations that you guys would like to have, but they would be breakthrough innovations for Sierra Leone, for rural Sierra Leone. And so, if you start thinking about policy questions, is there a way that we can facilitate user innovation in places where institutions are weak and the need is especially high? I think it's an open question. Hopefully, we have some time to talk about it. And what can we really learn from technology that is used in countries where the need is high? So I want to leave you with these questions. I think we touched on enough things to talk for a whole week. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Manish. This is obviously a complex subject, and we looked at it from two different lenses, quite heavily in terms of what's happening in emerging markets and how market-driven innovation, both in the case of IBM and in the case of mobile banking. And on the supply side, in terms of particularly in the case of the IBM Research Lab, the things that you talked about, how IBM is leveraging the research lab in India and similarly other economies for global problems, global issues for the company. This is a subject we could carry on for quite some time, but I also should make note of that we have Tarun's keynote starting in like 1 minute. So I will then, instead of using any time for Q&A, thank again to Manish and Paul and adjourn the session. Thank you very much.